Welcome back to Attention Elsewhere. My name is Eli, and I'm joined by my co-host Alistair. In case you forgot what we do here, we spotlight underappreciated, overlooked, and or up-and-coming entertainment media, which means that we tackle books, games, films, manga, manhwa, everything in between. But today, we are actually going to be continuing a conversation that we had in the last episode about a game. We'll be picking up on our conversation about Signalis, so if you are at all confused by our discussion today, then I suggest going back and re-listening to that. So thank you and enjoy the episode.
But I feel like there's a perhaps fourth term that we need to bring into the equation, and that is because Signalis is absolutely a work of Gothic fiction. And so if we're talking about Gothic fiction, we kind of need to talk about incest. And I think this fits. I think this fits, even though...
No, go for it.
And so I'm hoping as I talk, this is going to loop back around into what I already said. Because across the game, we seem to have the results of what in any other context, i.e. not science fiction, but in specifically like 18th and 19th century Gothic fiction, would be the extension of bloodlines past an end point. The replicas are a really good example of this, especially Elster, where the neural pattern has been lost for Elster units. And so now they are cloning a clone of a person, of a thing. And part of this seems to be ending in degradation. It feels the same for the nation as attached to the empire. The nation seems almost an incestuous child of the empire in that it is both a reflection of it and it is a degradation of it. It's collapsing even as it manifests the same genes, or however you want to describe it. It's doing what the empire is doing, but it's failing. And I think the empire is also failing. The revolution seems to oh no. Oh my god. Okay, wait. The connections. Tell me what the Penrose's mission is.
To expand and find planets with other resources.
So, if the nation is the incestuous child of the empire, this decision to expand the reach of the nation, to colonize new planets, to ingest new territory, continues to fit with the Gothic assumption of, like, at some point we must expand the bloodline. We must continue it however we choose to, and in this case it is by territory. The empire cannot exist, or the nation cannot exist, when it is constrained to its own space, and so it must expand. This is the truth of all empires, and it's often why empires fail as well.
Would it be very mean of me to say that everything you've just described has its parallel in asexual reproduction?
No, because this is why I was drawn to it. This is why I think both incest and asexual reproduction seem to both work within this space. It's simply that when you first posited this question, the thing that came to mind, again, because Signalis is absolutely a Gothic work, is incest is at the heart of the Gothic genre.
So, for those of us out there who have never heard of an asexual reproduction, let me break it down as it relates to Signalis and literally everything that you just said right now. An asexual species or individual can replicate itself and produce offspring that are literally just a clone of itself. As a result, there are a couple of benefits for the species and major weaknesses. In a favorable environment, the asexual species can rapidly colonize an area because they reproduce way faster and more efficiently. And in a favorable environment, especially one with few significant predators, They will overpopulate. Another benefit. Actually, no, that was the only benefit. The two detriments are that regardless of environment, an asexual species is more likely to succumb to harmful mutations because every species that reproduces mutates randomly. But the reigning theory, I think it's the Red Queen hypothesis, is that sex is a really important evolutionary advantage in that by intermingling genetics, you can squash out certain harmful mutations. Mutations which usually make the species members more susceptible to disease, or else like harmful mutations that just like degrade the individual, regardless of disease that they may or may not contract. Another advantage to intermingling genetics is that a more genetically diverse species is better equipped to handle new stressors in the environment. An asexual species is literally just copies repeated over and over and over again, having very little genetic diversity. So if a stressor in the environment, such as like a predator was introduced, a predator with a taste for this asexual species, there would be little to no members of it that would be different enough to avoid detection by this predator or avoid being consumed by this predator and then to replicate and live on. And even if there was, they might not be able to replicate fast enough to keep the species alive. The moral of the story is that genetic diversity is great and eugenics is really stupid.
Agreed on all fronts and good explanation. If we are to say that the Empire has essentially been reproduced asexually as the nation, which may be a stretch, but I want to just start there, then we might argue that the nation is unable to adequately meet its goals of freedom for its citizenship because it is connected and upheld by the very same structures of power and control, i.e., the replicas, bioresonance, etc., as the Empire itself. It is too close a replication of the Empire to be capable of change into something that it wants to be.
Yes. Regardless of how the nation's citizens think of themselves as different from the Empire, they're not. You could say they're genetically the same, they're genetic copies. And then, even within the nation, they are replicating themselves over and over and over and over again, as would an asexual species, unwilling to bring in new genetic material, you could say, the kind of creativity, the cultural creativity that Ariane expresses, and thus are setting themselves up for their own extinction. This is a population, especially the replicas, are a population that is uniquely vulnerable to stressors, and that when stressed, whatever harm may befall one spreads throughout the entire population, as evidenced by Commander Falke, because of the supernatural bullshit called bioresonance. Further hammering the nail of my point far past the point it should be into the wood, the upsides of this asexual reproduction in the nation could blind them to the consequences because, yes, the replicas are credited with being the only thing that has allowed the nation to stand against the Empire for so long because they can keep creating them much faster, more efficiently. So, in a sense, they have definitely aided the nation's own efforts to colonize and expand, which again makes them just a replica of the Empire. Because literally, what is an empire? Empire is the seat of one culture that has expanded and colonized others in its orbit.
Yeah. I think we've managed to add more than just a little spice to the mac and cheese.
We've got paprika in here. Copious amounts of paprika. Can you tell that I've never actually spiced mac and cheese before? What's supposed to go in here?
I'm the white dude. I know how to spice mac and cheese.
I don't really eat mac and cheese.
Valid. Fair enough.
We don't really do that amongst my people.
Uh,
Anyway, can I
yeah.
take us in yet another direction?
If it's towards Adler,
Oh, we'll get there. That motherfucker's on my mind at all times. But no, not immediately. So, one question that I have for you that more broadly encapsulates survival horror is, in light of our discussion about the empire, the nation, and their what defines their cultures, in what ways do these entities, as well as entities that inspired them in the real world, intersect with the medium of this game? It's a survival horror game. Also, a survival horror game that is clearly evoking cosmic horror. So, in what ways do, broadly speaking, survival horror, empire, like authoritarianism, and eldritch horror all intersect?
I love and hate this question. And that is the one that's been stuck in my head since you put questions forward, and one that I don't have a good answer for, but I have stuff.
Well, stuff is all we can provide. In fact, one could argue that we're all just made of stuff.
If that stuff is combined into a singular thing like a human, it's a gestalt.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about empire and its need to create an other with which to define itself by. Because I think that the other two are connected into it. And it's also connected into the fact of why Lovecraft was a bit of a racist fuck.
A touch of racism.
Yeah.
Much like the pepper sprinkled across my mac and cheese.
Christ.
Except Lovecraft wouldn't really like pepper, because pepper is, it's a little dark.
So bad. Okay. Determining the angle to approach this at. So I guess let's just start with
You start wherever you want to start. You don't even have to answer the question, really.
you see how that's not helpful? um, no. I got it. I think when we are looking at the relationship between the empire and the nation, we recognize that while the nation is an asexually reproduced product of the empire, that the nation defines itself in opposition to the empire. It defines itself as not that, even as it replicates it. And this is true of empire in general. Empire needs to define something that is not itself, or to choose something that is not itself to oppose itself against and to identify itself. This has been true of basically every empire. It's part of their expansionism, and it's true here as well. Eldritch horror similarly requires that which is human and that which is not of this earth. We look at Lovecraft as sort of the founding of Eldritch horror, and I have my feelings about that. But he's a useful example, at least in this case, of much of his writing was done, at least as far as we understand, from his perspective as he related as a white dude in America to seeing people that were not like him. And he was clearly fearful of people that were not like him. And he was fearful of cultures and religion. And anything that he did not understand was something to be hated or feared. Lovecraft was a huge racist, so this kind of tracks. And so Eldritch horror has taken that and become the thing of which we have usually a protagonist who is destabilized, whether in their position in society or their position in reality, by something that cannot exist with how they look at the world. This can be something really obvious like Cthulhu. Or in a better example to this work, we can look at Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow is a book of short stories, most of which are connected by either a real play that exists within the world of these characters, i.e., the King in Yellow, or by connections to that, whether it is the king, whether it is something like the Yellow Sigil that exists within one of the stories, or other things. There's connections to this fictional play. And that play is said to destabilize the mind, destabilize reality if you read it. And this is what happens to a lot of the characters within it, is that they touch an element of the play and suddenly their mental capacity is overwhelmed or transformed. And again, this is true of all Eldritch Horror. This is how Eldritch Horror works. And so Eldritch Horror and Empire are clearly connected.
So what I'm hearing is that art is like super dangerous, right? Art bad. Touch art be transported into memory sequences that may or may not belong to you.
You know, I feel like that's not what Signalis is arguing, but also that art can itself be a destabilizer.
Art's like, fuck reality. I'm gonna go make my own.
Yeah. Might allow you to define yourself as not part of the empire or not part of the nation. And this is, I think, what Lovecraft didn't understand, and it's a reason that Eldritch Horror has been time and time again used by queer writers or other marginalized groups in ways that Lovecraft never meant, obviously. And so we have a lot of tales in which we have characters that empathize more with the eldritch deities or creatures at the heart of the story rather than the narrators, who are more often like deeply conservative. Okay, that's two of the three. Survival horror. I feel like it is not unfair to say that if we extend this to video games, and in general I mean sort of AAA space video games, and even a lot of indie, that more often than not the player's relationship to the video game is in opposition either to the video game itself, i.e. they are playing against it, or they are playing against enemies within that environment. This gets a little tenuous, but we're just going to use this for now.
Can you provide an example of a real game that does this? For me, mostly.
Yes. I think we can look at this even from the start of survival horror, at least as generally looked at is Resident Evil 1. There's games before that, Clock Tower, etc. But if we look at Resident Evil 1, we have the player existing, it might be a stretch to say in opposition to, because they are still playing the game and still interacting with it, but the player character is in opposition to the Spencer Manor, the manner in which you fight through and the story is told. That manor is haunted by all manner of creatures, it is filled with enemies, and so it acts sort of as a dungeon that you have to overcome. And I feel like that can be extended to a lot of video games, but where survival horror, what really makes this experience special in a lot of ways is just how much the world that you are experiencing seems to hate you.
Just like real life.
Yeah. And Signalis does this really, really well with the fact that Elster can only carry 6 items. That's not the only thing that makes Signalis's world incredibly difficult to navigate and to get through. There are obviously puzzles, keycards, etc. But its world is in opposition to your goal, to your purpose, to that of Elster, and to the player themselves trying to see the end of the game.
I'll also point out that the rule of 6, only 6 items in your inventory at any given point of time, is a nation rule.
Yeah, it is.
There is a poster very early on in the game, about the time where you're learning the mechanics, and so all the posters are being very cute and like teaching you how to play the game. One in particular, the one about the rule of 6 and only carrying 6 items, it evokes the nation's culture about, resource management and not owning your own property or whatever, borrowing that socialist language disingenuously.
No, that's a great addition. I forgot about that poster. It's one of the best moments from the early game, is being like, oh fuck, I only have 6 item slots, and then going, oh god, it's state mandated.
And that's why it took me about 15 hours to beat this less than 10-hour game.
I did it in 8.
You know what? If this were a competition, you would win.
To be fair, I've played it before. But anyways, back to the point. Empire, Eldritch Horror, and Survival Horror all share this need for the quote-unquote protagonist, even in the Empire versus the Empire is, from the tale that they're telling, the protagonist, all share a need to define themselves off of an external threat. And that's where my train of thought has derailed, crashed, and exploded. It goes further, but I'm going to let you help, please.
Oh, I was just going to ask a clarifying question,
Yeah.
which I think you've already touched upon. But like, who's the other then in this scenario? Just remind me.
In the case of Signalis, the other is anything that is opposed to Elster's mission, in this case, to kill Ariane. Right? Anything that prevents her from getting back to Ariane can be considered other, insofar as it blocks her progress. I think Ooh. Can I pull us to Adler?
No.
God damn it. I have a connection.
Okay, voice or connection?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to just put it out there, but I think it's important that through the lens of us as the player experiencing Signalis, Adler appears an antagonist to our goal. Adler himself is not necessarily an antagonist, nor is he necessarily evil. I think that's just important in that, like, the world is not actually, right, or the elements that we see as obstacles or antagonists don't have to be. It's just because of the purpose that we're following that they are.
This is not the tangent I wanted to take us on, but that could evoke Elster's original neural archive as a soldier. I'm trying to remember where I learned this, so I don't remember. You're just going to have to trust me.
Trusted.
In wartime, the individual soldier has to compartmentalize a lot. In Elster's case, she literally has a mechanic for compartmentalizing trauma, which I find hilarious. But in a wartime situation or a very stressful situation, it's, one could say, a mental survival mechanism to treat everything as the enemy so as to best protect yourself.
This brings us actually back very nicely to our conversation about Orome, which the briefest of recaps is to say that when we were talking about soldiers, we talked about the fact that for the soldiers to be soldiers, they have to do what you say, which is look at everything else outside of themselves and their unit as a potential source of danger or threat or death. But as the main character of that book, Sege, experiences, when the dust has settled, he is reminded that they are all the same.
We all bleed.
And they all died for a cause, whether that cause was the one that they were fighting for or not.
Yeah, which you could say the same thing of the replicas and the Gestalts. There's a couple of notes advising the Gestalts not to eat the replicas, even if their flesh and blood mimics Gestalt flesh and blood perfectly well. But anyway, to return to the intersections between survival horror, empire, and cosmic horror, just to add my own 2 cents, I think that survival horror uniquely captures the elements of empire. I was specifically thinking capitalist empire, but it need not be specifically capitalist, where you have to be managing your resources and there's a sort of manufactured scarcity. There's a triaging which medical care to give to yourself because there are limited resources. And so sometimes it's not uncommon for players to keep themselves, maybe intentionally or otherwise, at low health to deliberately do harm to their own well-being, or well, their character's well-being, in the name of managing resources, because there's a manufactured scarcity. There's also callous weighing of lives. It's not an uncommon strategy to also leave enemies alive and just skirt around them instead of clearing out floor. It all comes back to resource management.
Yeah, just to add on to that, within resource management, the fact that when you choose to leave enemies alive, it's not a choice based on their humanity or lack thereof. The choice is made on whether or not you want to waste a bullet on them.
I actually have kind of lost count of this trope in specifically films, but probably not exclusively. The idea of not wanting to waste a bullet on somebody whom you deem to be lesser than you, to be inhuman and not deserving of that bullet. You'd rather, I don't know, beat him over the head with a stick or something. So, in those ways, survival horror is a very medium, like the classic elements of survival horror evoke, in my opinion, a specifically capitalist kind of dystopia. As it relates to cosmic horror, I found it really interesting that there are lines in the game that are censored and will just always remain censored. And I was thinking about, the madness that this drove me to speculate over what lies behind the word. Can we not say the same thing of cosmic horror? We know something's out there, but we don't fucking know what, and we're never going to be able to peel back the curtain, so we're just going to have to sit with that and go mad.
As an additional thought to that, I suppose that while we can draw parallels between Empire, protagonists of Eldritch horror, at least early Eldritch horror, and protagonists of survival horror, we can also draw parallels between Empire itself and the Eldritch entities, or the entities that oppose you in the other two genres. That suggests that Empire is a genre. Empire is not a genre.
I mean, look at the film industry. I would say that Empire is I'm not calling anybody out per se, but you know who you are. But yeah, so to recap, if the intersections between survival horror and Empire lie in resource management, then I think the intersections between cosmic horror and Empire lie in censorship, in what is not there that should be there or could be there. And maybe we can draw a parallel between censorship and resource management as well. Could we argue that censorship is a form of manufactured scarcity? Not scarcity in the sense that like you need what's behind the censor, even if you really, really want to know what's behind the black line or the blurred image. It's erasure of something that should exist, like resources. In some cases, there should be enough resources that you don't have to manage them, but for whatever reason, scarcity has been manufactured. I don't think I'm making any sense. Save me.
Oh, I think you were doing just fine. Can I save you? I think we've answered the question.
I think maybe I'm just going to rephrase this as a question.
Sure.
Is there a relationship between censorship and resource management? And the answer can be no. It doesn't have to be yes.
This might just be rephrasing in part what you've already said. But within a society like an empire, there is almost always enough wealth, enough resources for everyone. It's just not divided evenly in ways to support everyone. We could draw a parallel then between the fact that there is actually enough and that all of these scarcities are artificially created to engender a certain experience, at least in the case of survival horror, right? The decision to limit the resources that you have is meant to emphasize the horror of the situation that you're in. Shit, I only have 6 bullets and this hallway is filled with enemies and each one takes 3 to take down. The choice becomes one of managing those few resources that you have. And so as that connects to Censorship is a deliberate removal of information that in most cases would help to remove abstraction from the picture, remove mystery, possibility. Those blank words or those crossed out words or removed words from documents is a possibility space. It's a space for us to sort of dream of like what might be there. I think that's why so many people are so excited when CIA, FBI, whatever, release like declassified documents.
Really banal stuff that we could have all surmised on our own.
Yeah, and yet for some reason when we actually get that, everyone seems to lose their minds. That feels similar insofar as the reason for censoring it, the reason for classifying it, is one not for the people. It's not for the people, it's to protect more often than not the state. Or to protect an individual, often for no reason. A lot of words are classified just because that's how the state does it. Yeah, jump in, please save me. Now I'm the sinking ship.
We're all sinking together. Our ship is leaking coolant. Our replica gal pal is dying. So are we.
That sounds like something that we played recently.
Wonder what it could be. We can only wonder. But I guess the follow-up question that I have then is, in Signalis, why censor the king in yellow? Yes, there are lots of artworks evoked in this game, but as I recall, the king in yellow is the only title which, in canon, is censored. It was on the shelves of the Ito family bookstore. It was confiscated. And for all intents and purposes, Ariane or none of the characters ever really got to read it. As you mentioned, maybe Iris did, and maybe it became a part of a possible plot wherein she was an Imperial spy. But all that's a little bit besides the point. Why censor the King in Yellow? Why center that title out of the rest of them?
So there is a challenge here in that we don't know which version of the King in Yellow it is. We don't know if this is the Robert W. Chambers book or if it is the play taken from the book. This is part of Signalis's charm in a lot of ways, is there's so much that we don't know. If it's the play, the reason might be one of superstition. I've seen enough theories arguing that Signalis, or the narrative of Signalis, is basically an adaptation of Chambers' book, with the King in Yellow within it being his play, which was viewed within the book as a work of art that creates a lot of like superstitious unease. So if it's that, then we might just simply argue that what we're seeing here is a recreation of the society from within the King in Yellow. If it's the novel itself, it might be banned or at least somewhat censored for demonstrating the possibility of art. The stories themselves often find horror manifesting from artists. Not necessarily the art itself, though the mask would argue differently, one of the short stories. But more often than not, artists seem to be the point that horror is catalyzed from.
Speaking of masks and masks off, that motherfucker, Adler, who has a line somewhere in the midst of all of his cryptic bullshit about I wear no masks. Sure, Adler, sure.
Which is literally a quote. That is a literal quote from The King in Yellow, the play.
He read a little bit of banned literature. Or somebody read a little bit of banned literature and that somehow implanted in Adler's brain.
May I read a quick excerpt?
You may.
So this is an excerpt from the play that is positioned between two stories within The King in Yellow. It comes after The Repairer of Reputations, which is the very first story, and the second, The Mask. It reads, and it's a play, so I'll simply state who the character is and then read the line. Camilla says, "You, sir, should unmask." To which the stranger replies, "Indeed?" Casilda, another character within the play, says, "Indeed, it's time. We all have laid aside disguise but you." To which the stranger replies, "I wear no mask." Camilla, terrified, in an aside to Casilda, says, "No mask? No mask!" The King in Yellow, Act 1, Scene 2.
Adler, that motherfucker, who apparently wears no masks. Adler's the stranger? I don't know. Speaking as somebody who has not read the book.
That's literally all we get of the play.
As one could surmise, Adler bothers me. Not only can we not punch him in the face because he is not one of the three bosses of this game, not only is he a dreaded cishet man in a sea of beautiful women, hot robot ladies, he is apparently the only character who seems to recognize what is going on. Like I said, he says a lot of cryptic nonsense, but when you put all that nonsense together, it's pretty clear that he understands the cycle is recurring here. And he blames Elster for it, and I feel like that's actually pretty fair. Yeah, I think he has identified the source of the problem. Whether or not he's aware of Ariane, I'm not like 100% sure. Probably, yeah. At this point, the man knows everything. Most intriguingly, he's like the last character to stand in Elster's way. He blames Elster for everything, tries to stop her, fails because he has knife, she has gun, and then looks very, very sad as he watches her go forth to kill her wife. So, what do we do with him? What do we do? And namely, what do we do with this being the one man? That's what bothers me so much. I'm like, he's the guy. How dare he?
So I love Adler.
No. Go ahead.
Not insofar as, like, every time that he appears, I absolutely want to punch him in the face. Want to be clear. Still deeply punchable. Very pretty, though. Deeply punchable. To me, at least, Adler is, in a sea of foils, Elster's foil. Insofar as they are both aware of the cycle. In different ways. And I think different cycles that they're experiencing. But literally, by virtue of us playing the game and playing Elster, dying, saving, restarting, even seeing the false ending followed by the real ending, we're both aware of what is happening, just in different ways and from different sides of the coin. But the question of why is he the only man has been one that's been stuck in my head. And if we read them as foils, and I think we need to extend it to who they are connected to. So Elster, Ariane, or Elster, Alina, and then Adler, Valka. These are very similar relationships and I think should be read in similar ways. But what makes this really interesting to me is that Adler's love for Falca is mandatory. He is programmed to love her, to worship her, and she doesn't love him back, at least as so far as we know. We get very little from Falca, but the Falca that we meet is yearning for Ariane.
As Elster.
Yeah.
What an awkward love triangle slash square slash hexagon, probably.
Yeah. But Adler's love, what is really important, Adler's love is mandatory, whereas the love between Ariane and Elster is forbidden. That connection between Replica and Gestalt, not meant to exist, and certainly not in the way that it does. And obviously this is commenting at least partially on like homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia, whichever axis you want to approach it as, because the only relationship that is sort of officiated by the state or by the nation is a heteronormative relationship, but it's one-sided. And the one that is decreed forbidden is a homosexual. They're lesbians. And they were lesbians.
Is Adler the token straight?
To be fair, there's nothing even to claim that like Elster is not bisexual and Adler could be bi.
Yeah, where are her other options?
Yeah.
this society, which seems to be primarily made up of women, the bisexuals are starving.
I mean, I'm eating good personally playing this game, but like, you know,
I would like to say that I also really enjoy Adler as a character, but also fuck him. So
I mean, agreed.
what's the meme? What's the meme? It's the kind of straight ship that the gays love. I'm like, oh, no, he's actually kind of great.
I mean, look, there's something even once the face comes off, I'm like, mm.
Would still smash
So long as he doesn't say more words,
as long as he's quiet.
need him to be a sub.
As if he isn't already.
True, Malka is like 10 feet tall.
She's massive, which is why I can't hate the man.
But yes, that is my start of Adler stuff, is the relationships and the foils.
I thank you for actually answering the question of why a man, because I was caught up more in the question of why him as a character. Like, why is he experiencing the same cycle, but he seems to be uniquely aware of it well before Elster recovers her memories and starts to piece things together? And in theory, Elster might be just as clueless as the rest of us. I know from developer interviews that Signalis, the story, is meant to reinforce the player's playstyle. So if you, the player, don't encounter the right notes or don't make connections, then you could very easily read Elster, the character, as being similarly lost in limbo. Adler, however, you can't mistake. Adler knows what's going on. He has his own theories. Maybe he's wrong in some places, but for the most part, he's right. Yeah, like, time is repeating. Reality is corroding. Yes, Elster is probably responsible for this. Like, why is he uniquely aware of it? And I have some answers. I don't think they're all, like, wholly satisfactory, but I think it largely comes back to journaling and diary keeping. Every single replica, well, most of the replicas are required to do that to stabilize their persona, but Adler, gosh, I actually can't remember if the Adler units are required to journal more often, but regardless, he does, and it's only by journaling that he's able to look back on his previous entries and go, hey, I don't remember writing that. Why are all these diary entries dated for the same day? Huh. What's going on here? And so he starts thinking about it, which is a bad decision on his part, and he comes to his own conclusions. Might it be fair to say that journaling can help keep time stable? As reality is breaking around you, it creates the eye of the hurricane in a way that you can return to and ground yourself in.
I think that's a really good read and might come back to our previous conversation about most of the replicas not actually creating art beyond what is necessary for them to sustain their persona. But the Adler units, well, Adler himself, in this case being the only one beside Ariane that is creating and so far is keeping himself stable that way.
This might be a really mean statement, but I do truly believe it. I think that most art derives from the artist's boredom as a natural state, but also maybe boredom with the art that they see in the world, and they want to put forth something new. Adler units are notorious for getting bored really easily. So they're constantly hunting for new experiences, one of which, for our Adler, is journaling. Like, he gets really fixated on this puzzle that he solves, and inside the puzzle is a blank journal, and he's like, what the fuck? But then he switches gears, he switches interest immediately. He's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna fill the pages of this journal now, I guess. So Adler units get bored really easily. They're constantly hunting for new experiences, and it seems like they are in the most natural position out of all the replicas to, like, create from their own experience, propelled by their own boredom.
Perhaps to add to that, the reason that he acts as a foil to Elster is not just romantically, but also in that his fear is both of losing Falca, but also of the state punishing him. Whereas Elster's only thing, the only motivator for her, because she has been quote unquote corrupted by Ariane, not opening the little envelope on the Penrose that says, hey, don't show the replicas these things or they're gonna lose it.
Ariane proceeded to do everything that the state advised her not to.
Including watching war movies.
And the hilarious thing is that, like, she didn't even intentionally do this. She just didn't even read the instructions. And a case in point for why the nation has set itself up for its own downfall is that what's on the ship? I think Ariane complains that, like, there's only war films here. It's so boring. There's only war films and kitschy propaganda dramas.
Yeah. And also Elster.
And Elster, who is, and I believe, like, these ships are outfitted specifically with Elster units because of their unique design for survival horror. They're all-purpose combat mechanics, and that's what you want in the ship, in these particular ships. So obviously, let's stuff it to the brim with war films.
Yeah.
They need to fire some people in the nation.
Yeah, I mean, this is what sets Adler apart from I was about to say Jane Signalis. Have you watched the video yet?
If you know, you know. And no, we will not explain.
God. This is what sets Adler apart from Elster, is that Elster's fear at this stage, quite possibly because they're so far into space that it doesn't matter anymore. Also, they're both dying. She doesn't fear the nation's retribution. Adler does. And it determines how they act in crisis. And so that is part of the foil mechanic of those two.
That could be also why I think Adler, unlike Elster, is fighting to maintain the equilibrium. He wants Commander Falke to go back to the way that she used to be. He wants to restore their relationship. He wants to restore the Sierpinski facility to back to what it used to be, which was a horrible hellscape, especially for the Gestalt workers who were overworked, not paid at all, I'm guessing, and constantly collapsing from fatigue and illness, and all the replicas who also themselves did not seem to be super happy to be here. Nobody really wanted to be here, but maybe Adler, because Adler is fighting to preserve that, which is reality, according to the nation. This is just how things are.
Adler has literal files on how he tortured a shit ton of people to death. Adler is the tool of the nation. Which does mean that I hate him for that.
Whereas Elster's like, fuck that shit. Elster's like, I don't care. I just want to go see my wife again.
Yeah.
This is a horrible segue, a truly awful segue to what I just said about Adler and maintaining the equilibrium, this literal status quo. But he is also, I would not say content to be, but definitely stuck in limbo. There's lots of boundaries in this game, which are often the turning point into, like, completely different areas of the game. Walking through doors, dropping through holes, ascending and descending steps often takes you from one area of the game to literally another that is not physically possible for you to travel to just by, like, stepping up some stairs. We meet Adler next to most boundaries. The elevator shaft, which he eats us down. When he's hunting Issa by the hole, he's on the steps, like, in every single ending, including the fake-out ending. We very rarely see him anywhere else. I think most notably, he mentions a couple of times about how he has never been able to, quote-unquote, return. And he's also trying to prevent Elster from crossing these boundaries into the next spaces. He seems stuck there. He seems stuck in this limbo space, either unable or unwilling to cross the boundaries. Why might that be?
I mean, I think it rather easily ties into the difference in what the two characters desire. Adler in desiring a return to the status quo, a return to nation as he understands it, a return to Falca as he understands it, is unable to think or sort of comprehend beyond what he sees as reality. It might be him. This is a bit of dialogue that is more like flashed on the screen, and so we have to assume that it's his, but maybe this is hell. comes from Adler multiple times. And his hell is a space that he can't navigate, a space that he can't understand because he has set boundaries for himself. Not the boundaries of the world, but boundaries of how things must work, act, and do. Ulster has none of that attachment to that, and I think part of that actually comes from her relationship with Ariane and like artistry, and even their relationship being quote unquote like forbidden within the eyes of the nation. They have spent the last, I don't know how many years they were on the Penrose, but they've spent so much of that time freely acting against what the nation demands. And so when Elster comes to those spaces, it's not something that she even thinks about. Obviously, this is a guesswork because we aren't privy to everything that Elster has in her head, but even from the start, passes out of the Penrose, passes through the gateway, down the stairs, through the tunnel, into another room, out of that room, into Sierpinski Station. She does all of that without stopping, without questioning it, as far as we can tell. And so that comes back into this equation of like Adler and Falke, Elster and Ariane. Their distinction in how they act also affects how they interact with the world that has now been changed beyond recognition.
We could read that one of the boundaries, a metaphysical boundary, is the boundary between Ariane and Elster as the nation state dictates, and that the moment Elster and Ariane mutually crossed that boundary to be with each other on the Penrose ship, now suddenly no boundary is enough to keep Elster back. Adler, however, loves his boundaries. He loves them so much, and he is unable to cross them. It also just occurred to me that if the space of the boundary, stair steps, falling, whatever, like falling through a hole, is a limbo space stuck in between, especially stair steps, which is like kind of just go on and on. You can't just like quickly pass through a staircase, which we find Adler on a lot. He loves the stair steps. Him being stuck in limbo mirrors the state of the one he yearns for, Commander Falke. Falke is asleep for most of this game, and one could consider sleeping to be a kind of limbo in between the cycles of each day. Sleeping is even also where dreams arise, and dreams are often the template for limbo spaces, at least in art. Liminal spaces borrow the logic of dreams. A limbo which he could not cross the boundary because he can't wake her up. And I find that's a really interesting tension between his character and his conflict and Elster's, and even Issa's as well. Elster and Issa are both searching for their loved ones. In Issa's case, her twin sister. In Elster's case, Ariane. But they have the benefit of their loved ones being missing. They have something to search for, and they have light at the end of the tunnel, being that they will find what remains of their loved ones, and that when they find them, that's the end of their search. Adler knows where Falke is. She's literally right there, but she's not missing. She's right there. He's searching for her. He can't find her. He can't access her, but she's also right there. She's not lost.
No, that's really good. It's the where from that.
At the risk of keeping this very episode in a limbo space, maybe we should end it here before we find ourselves repeating ourselves over and over again, as we are already finding ourselves doing. So let's cross the boundary into the next segment of this episode and ask the obligatory question, which is, what was your favorite part of this game that made it worth playing? And that in your case, maybe in new light, made it worth discussing and playing again, because you did play it upon release.
Keep having cop-out answers. The cop-out answer is that this game is at its best when it is a piece of discourse or a piece of conversation. I love the experience of Signalis. This is what drew me to it initially when I played it, was genuinely the experience, the aesthetic, the music. All of that was in and of itself the reward of its own was simply the experience of it. The joy this time of returning to it and the value this time in returning to it is that rather than leaving it as this isolated experience, I've taken time to not only talk about it with you, but sort of unpack the narrative and unpack what is actually happening in the story and what it may mean in terms of, well, everything that we've covered prior to this, to show that it is in fact as rich a text as the wealth of inspiration that it draws from. We've touched on it a little bit, but it's important that on my first playthrough, I was really thrown off by the sequence in which Elster is trying to tear open the hatch to the Penrose, trying to get to Ariane, and her arm, like, disintegrates.
This is the fake out ending, right?
Yes. So prior to her cannibalizing her own body for parts. And in that sequence, I was thrown off because of how direct and overt that reference is. It is almost frame perfect with Ghost in the Shell, the first movie. And that overtness bothered me. Not because it's bad or animated poorly or anything like that. It doesn't even necessarily feel like a pastiche of something else. It's how close it was. And while it bothered me at the time, I think coming back to it has allowed me to go, but why? That's an intentional choice. It's not something like a throwaway line in, I don't know, anything where they go, I have a bad feeling about this, and you go, ooh, it's the line from Star Wars that we all care about, I guess. The references here are done to talk about art, to talk about symbolism, to talk about the themes of this game in a way that makes it a really rich experience. I think that's maybe my favorite part of it. That this rabbit hole feels endless to me in a way that it rarely does with video games. Sorry, video games, but your narratives are not usually anywhere close to anything I could simply like pick up off of my bookshelf or film-wise. Like, there's very few narratives that get close to giving me that sort of richness that I desire out of my media. And that's not to say that games are not art or any of that bullshit, but like, it's rare to get a narrative like this where I feel that there is significantly more to really pull at. And yourself? Your favorite part? Cop-out answers are allowed?
I have two answers. The first answer is a real basic bitch answer.
Yeah! Is it Mina?
No, it's not, but I love her. Minus the 8-foot tall, over 8-foot tall mining unit that you fight. She's the first boss who has like an adorable little face stuffed into a giant mining suit, and she loves teddy bears. I love her. Died to her like a bajillion times, but each time was a joy. But no, my actual answer, part one of my actual answer, is the same answer I give for every piece of media we review that has a soundtrack. I love the soundtrack of this game. Great, wonderful, 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 and they really, really add to the sequences, the cutscene, the game. It's just gorgeous and beautiful, and go listen to it.
Health's album, the backing track for all of Signalis, or most of it, is incredible.
You dropped big money on the vinyl, right?
Yeah, I did. It's also available in CD. I do recommend. Listening to it is not the most comforting of experiences. Surprise, surprise. But hearing it isolated from the game itself is also worthwhile in a way that I don't always feel towards video game soundtracks. So yes, agreed.
I think it is impossible to listen to certain tracks in this game without evoking the memory of playing through certain sequences. And what could be more Signalis than that? Anyway, that's my basic bitch answer. My real answer is just as basic because it's just your answer remixed. I'll try to add a little something new, create my own little collage. I did not catch every single reference or inclusion of a real life thing, art thing that exists in the world brought into this game. But I appreciate the way that their blunt and direct inclusion encouraged me to look towards other research subjects and to look into the history and the criticism interpretation of other pieces of art. This is the sort of game that if you're interested in parsing out what it means, you have to go learn about other stuff. And I love that kind of challenge. I love being given real direction for where to look, as opposed to other works of art which, whether intentional or not, usually disguise their source material or disguise their inspirations, and makes it really, really fucking hard to decide where to start researching. But with Signalis, it's like, no, start here, and here, and here, and also here. Here's a list, actually. I also really appreciate the other critics. This is kind of not answering the question because this is not really a product of the game. Who pointed out the obvious is that all art is a sum of its influences, and I loved the way that Signalis drew parallels between art and personhood. People are also the sum of their influences. I appreciated the parallel, as well as the bluntness with which it portrays its subjects, which surprisingly also made it seem really vague.
Yeah, it's one of the few pieces of art that I can think of where its deliberate and overt use of art actually enriches the text, but also somehow like cordons off our approach to knowledge or like gaining knowledge from the text itself. It's like, no, you have to be Elster and pass through all the gateways to get to the actual heart of this game by understanding these different subjects. And even here between us, I think we've certainly scratched the surface and hopefully found new meaning, but there's so much else that we could get caught in.
Much like the timeline of the game, the possibilities and the theories are endless.
Yes.
Which is a testament to this game's craft.
100%. So, given the joy with which you experience Signalis, what is my punishment? What are we covering next?
I'm being very nice by giving you a nice, neat chronological narrative. You're welcome. I suggest that we read a Chinese manhua next. Yin Shan Meng Tan, both scripted and drawn by Zhang Jing, who's actually better known, I think, for another manhua of hers called Aisha, which I've never read. It looks interesting, but that is not the manhua I put before you today. Yin Shan Meng Tan very, very loosely translates into English as Hidden Mountain Dream Talk. And that's relevant because this manhua, as of today, does not have an official English translation. So keep in mind that the only way to access it in English is through a patchwork of fan translations, some of which are better than others. Nevertheless, there's something really special about this work. It is a story within a story. The framing of this starts with a traveler in a monkey mask whose gender is unknown, who stops by a shrine in the mountains, which is already occupied by a young woman who, according to her, regularly steals away to this shrine to practice her art form, which I think is calligraphy, might be painting, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, a storm blows in, which traps the two there until the storm passes. And to pass the time, the traveler tells the story. But they make the mistake of asking the young woman what kind of story she would like to hear. And without any hesitation, shame, or second guessing, this young woman asks to hear a story about a handsome man. Person in the monkey mask has to honor the customer's wishes. The customer is always right, and so starts a story about a really handsome man. And that story is as such. The only living princess of a Chinese emperor is of marriageable age, but has shown no desire to marry. And while in disguise as a commoner during a festival, she catches sight of like a really smoking hot man with his grandma. And she decides to marry him. And since she is daddy's favorite, the emperor pulls strings to arrange for her marriage to this commoner who is also mute, which in this society is like a huge flaw. In order to propose, the emperor sends a messenger from the court to deliver the proposal to the man's grandma, who is the matriarch of the family, with like literally the whole family in attendance in the courtyard, which is like a couple generations. Like there's some really young folks there. It's huge. It's a big family. And this messenger, low-key, threatens this family into agreement by reminding them of an incident in the family history wherein the grandma's grandfather, I think, maybe great-grandfather, was accused of consorting with demons, which resulted in the empire massacring the entire family, leaving only the grandma alive when she was a young girl at the time, to kind of like be witness to this. He low-key threatens the current family into agreeing by reminding them of this, but the family is like kind of ecstatic about the proposal because with their grandson's marriage to the princess, this family will see a rise in status and opportunity. So everybody's really happy about this except for the young man in question and the grandma who survived the violence of the empire. Unfortunately, even though he very much does not want to marry the princess, he can't say no. Like, literally, he's mute. So he can't even speak up for himself, even slightly. And so he parts ways with his family to join the princess at court in a very, very unhappy marriage, at least unhappy on his part. She's thrilled. She's over the moon. And what ensues in the rest of the story within a story is half a love story, half a political drama. While the princess and the smoking hot young man are struggling through their marriage, the princess's half-brother conspires with the son of the Khan to, respectively, to rule over their own regions. The princess despises her half-brother, the feeling is mutual, they hate each other, and invariably finds herself and her smoking hot husband involved in this plotting. Now, what is really interesting about this setup is that the story is often interrupted by scenes between the person in the monkey mask and the young woman, wherein the two banter and argue about what it means to tell a story. And it is as much interested in the role of the person who requests a story as it is in the person who gives it. And that is one of the main reasons why I'm recommending that we discuss it, because this is not a story designed to like change the world or reveal some hidden mysteries or some hidden history that has been concealed. This is a story meant to entertain and pass the time. And yet it is treated with as equal gravity as a story with claims to importance. Separately, I'm also really interested in discussing this because this might be one of the few pieces of fiction that I've come across with a truly intense interest in intersectional politics. It is of deep concern whether or not the characters have intersections in gender, class, ethnicity, sexuality, aesthetic as well, who's beautiful, who's not. And the way that this manhwa unpacks it is like masterful. And last but not least, what I found personally interesting that I'm especially curious to hear your thoughts about once you read it is the role of desire in this manhwa. Without spoiling too much of it, this manhwa is very interested in intense desire that is absent sex in ways that I find really interesting. That is Yinshan Mungtan.
I'm looking back at just some of the panels and designs, and also this is a beautiful work as well. No, I'm really excited. I have not admittedly read a lot of manhwa beyond certain things that you have mentioned on occasion, and so I'm also curious to experience it as sort of a newcomer to the art form, I suppose. I don't know if that's quite the term for it, but you know what I mean. I am curious, have you finished it?
I have, I shit you not, 15 chapters to finish. So I didn't finish it, but I got really far. And the reason why I didn't finish it is because like life just got in the way, not because it dropped in quality or anything. Like I was actually really invested in it, but I needed to put it aside to finish some other project in my life, and I just forgot about it.
Okay. And then the other thing that's interesting me beyond the major points that you've made is accessibility to this sort of work. I'm noticing, just even taking a brief look, as you mentioned, it's sort of a patchwork of translation. And so I'm relatively curious if within our discussion we can also maybe touch on the inaccessibility of these sorts of stories literally as well as coming to it from a unique perspective. No, this sounds fantastic. Good choice. Very, very, very kind after Signalis. That is.
Yeah, keep that in mind.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I guess we will see you in the future for an episode on this.
Get hyped. Get confused, I guess.
It's always get confused with us.
If you like what we do here, consider buying us a coffee or Ko-fi or however the fuck it's pronounced. I don't care. Pronounce it however you'd like. Just buy us one if you like what we do here. And consider following us on social media. Our link tree is in the description. See you all during the next episode.